supposed to be. I'd like to welcome you to the City of Santa Rosa Board of Public Utilities meeting. Madam Secretary, could we have roll call?
Chairman Galvin, Vice Chair Arnone, Board Member Banford.
Here.
Board Member Dowd.
Here.
Board Member Grable.
Here.
Board Member Mullen.
Here.
Board Member Watts. Here.
As you can tell by the roll call, Board Member Badenford is on the phone and will be participating in the meeting. Chair Galvin and Vice Chair Arnone, I believe, are out of the country, both on separate trips. So I am the interim chairman for this meeting. Pretty exciting little event that we had with all the great hardworking blue shirts up there. So thank you, and there'll be an item on our agenda to further address that wonderful situation. With that, I will turn it over to our director first of all, are there any abstentions of board members on any of the items on the agenda? Hearing none, then I'll turn over for 3.1, the CWE Large Collection System of the Year Award, to Director Hornstein.
Thank you, Board Member Dowd. It's a true privilege to honor our department staff for being selected, for the City of Santa Rosa being selected as the California Water Environment Association's Large Collection System of the Year Award. The Collection System of the Year Award is given in recognition of outstanding collection system programs and operations, including a large array of activities, maintenance activities, asset management, regulatory compliance, public engagement, safety and training, fog control program. So many of these programs core to the day-in-day work that our local operations section does day in, day out at such a high quality, as well as all the support activities provided from around the entire department. I mean, it really does take a broad team to have a program at this level that receives this sort of recognition. This is really a significant milestone and achievement for Santa Rosa Water to receive this sort of prestigious award, and the entire team should be very proud, and I certainly know I am of this. This award, when we say Large Collection System of the Year, that signifies the competition for this award was agencies, City of LA, San Diego, the big sanitation districts that have service populations of millions of customers, that have resources so far beyond what we have. And I think that's just really exceptionally notable that you compete with these big dogs and really win. So really congratulations on this. It's been my experience that Santa Rosa Water, and particularly the local team, is so highly trained and skilled, and most notably really committed to providing the highest quality customer service. And just very briefly, I was recently with the water contamination issue we're dealing with, and I know so many of you all are very active supporting a range of activities. At the meeting, these residents come to the meeting and there's a lot of angst and frustration and a range of rebuilding issues, including the benzene, but a host of activities. And so there's a lot of venting and back and forth. Near the end of the meeting, a couple weeks ago that I was at, one person in the audience, there was maybe 30 people there, a smaller group, mentioned something to the effect of, we're throwing a lot of stuff at you, but I do want to say that on the bright side, your staff is so remarkable. And she talked about how you all out in the field take the time to talk to folks, you wave, you smile. I won't mention other utilities she did that just ignore you, PG&E, but I won't mention them, and others. And then it turned into almost everyone at the meeting wanted to share their positive stories of the interactions they've had with all of you out in the field. And it was one of the most remarkable 10 minutes I've ever experienced of this flood of just love coming at this department because of the work you do in the field and your approach to customer service. And at the end of the day, you know, that is what really matters, and that's what connects us to the residents, and often you're the only faces they see for the whole city necessarily. So just super work, and I did want to share that. So this award not only recognizes our commitment to the community, but also just the exceptional professionals that are out there day in, day out, protecting at the core public health and the environment. Just such a high calling and done so well. So before I introduce our special guest who's going to deliver the award to us, we wanted to play a short video. This video was generated from the city manager's office highlighting this operations team and this achievement, and it was recently part of a city manager newsletter that went out broadly. So with that, we'll catch the video and then introduce
Meet the city's water operations team. This team is responsible for operating and maintaining nearly 1,200 miles of water and sewer pipes, the equivalent of driving from Santa Rosa to Denver, Colorado. This invisible underground infrastructure, which serves homes, businesses, schools, and hospitals, is an essential part of our community, and this team takes great pride in providing safe and reliable drinking water and protecting public health and the environment. The city's water operations team is quality-driven as well as cross-trained in all maintenance aspects of the water distribution and wastewater collection systems. These skilled operators are responsible for delivering nearly 6 billion gallons of water to our community each year, as well as providing water for firefighting. During the wildfires, the city's water operations team was an integral part of the firefighting and recovery effort. The operations team went behind the fire lines to keep the system operating and water available for the firefighters. Post-fire, the team has been busily assisting with the investigation and repair of the damaged water infrastructure. This includes supporting the water quality investigation by isolating the system, replacing damaged water services, and assisting with sampling. The team is also responsible for managing the city's sewer system. Nearly 16 million gallons of wastewater flow through the city's sewer system every day to the Laguna treatment plant. During the wildfire, 2 sewer lift stations were destroyed in Fountain Grove. Staff responded with a temporary fix to keep the system operating and preventing any overflows. With a little ingenuity, the team was able to fabricate and install a new pump station. Most recently, the water operations team was recognized by the California Water Environment Association for their exceptional achievement and awarded the State Large Collection System of the Year Award. This prestigious award is presented to agencies with over 500 miles of sewer main. With nearly 590 miles of sewer pipe, Santa Rosa Water just qualified as large, competing with much larger agencies like last year's winner, LA Sanitation, who has a system of over 6,000 miles of pipe. The Collection System of the Year Award presented to Santa Rosa Water Operations Team recognized our city's outstanding maintenance programs, regulatory compliance, and safety and training procedures. I am thankful that this is the team serving our community and appreciate all the extra efforts they gave through our more recent challenges. The next time you see a member of this team, please help me to recognize these individuals by extending your gratitude for their service to our city.
And now I'm happy to introduce our special guest, Rodrigo Montanez he's our section president from the California Water Environment Association and works neighboring Napasan, to present the Collection System of the Year Award. Mr. Montanez, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you guys for inviting me as well. I'd like to capitalize a little bit more on what Director Bennett. I'd like to capitalize a little bit more on what Director Bennett Ornston mentioned. This is, to compete against cities like LA, San Diego, Irvine, it's huge, especially for just going over the 500-mile category. It's divided into 3 categories, but they just qualified over into the large category. We received a bunch of nominations in our section, which ranges from Ukiah all the way to Vacaville. So from that, they win they win our section and they get sent over to the state level. At the state level, now they're competing against bigger cities like LA and San Diego. Some of the criteria that we look for is, your maintenance programs, your safety, regulatory compliance, all of that takes into account. Some of the things that I was impressed with, which if it's okay if I'd like to mention. Yes. I looked at some numbers and I'm just going to mention a few, but from the previous year, going from 15 SSOs to 3, that's a huge percentage drop, especially for such a large system that you guys have. Responding to 1,617 customer calls related to water and wastewater, receiving more than 9,000 requests for USA, I&I section videos inspected of 70 miles alone, smoke tested 47 miles, inspected 5,255 manholes. These numbers are large, and it takes a special team to coordinate all of this and get everybody home safe. Safety is very important, as you all are aware with CWA. So I congratulate all of you. Your team is I can tell the team works as a unit, and that's another criteria that we look at is just making sure that you guys work as a unit. When you guys go on CSET teams, and it's just, you guys have to work together and get home safe. So with that, I'd like to present this award to City of Santa Rosa.
As stated by Director Horenstein, this board has every reason to be extremely proud of the efforts that you put forth and have put forth in us as the City of Santa Rosa getting this award. I think this board owes you another big round of applause. Thank you. That's pretty heartwarming to start a meeting that way. We'll go to 3.2 and an update on the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funding. And I believe that Director Horenstein will be presenting that.
Actually, we have Claire Myers who's going to do the presenting, but I just will take a minute to introduce it. As you'll hear, this is a grant program that follows on an event like we went through, and there's funding opportunities. As with all things FEMA, it's not easy, and you'll hear a lot of work that has gone into that. So with that, we do the process, and you'll see it laid out, is today it's kind of an informational study session, and we'll proceed taking any feedback we receive from the board. We expect the first meeting in August to bring it back for formal board support for the projects we'll be submitting on.
All right, thank you, Director Horenstein. Good afternoon, Board Member Dowd and members of the board. As we're all aware, the city of Santa Rosa has recently experienced the impacts of natural disasters at unprecedented scales. High disaster recovery costs, potential impacts to human life, and rising variability in hazard impacts are all motivators for the city to identify effective ways to reduce our vulnerability to future disasters now. I am here today to provide an overview of an opportunity to fund projects that would reduce risks from future natural disasters. I'll go over the grant program available through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the projects for which staff recommends pursuing grant funding. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HGMP, is funded by FEMA and administered by the California Office of Emergency Services. HMGP funding becomes available after a disaster is federally declared. However, the program does not fund repairs for damages that have already occurred from a disaster. Instead, the program provides funding for hazard mitigation activities that reduce or eliminate damages from future disasters, including earthquakes, fires, and floods. HMGP will provide up to $5 million per project and requires a local match of at least 25%. Santa Rosa is eligible for funding under DR 4344, which was established after the October wildfires, and FEMA is providing up to $333 million of funding to be distributed through a competitive grant process. They are accepting applications in 2 rounds, and we would like to submit applications in the 2nd round with a grant submittal deadline of September 4th of this fall. The city's potential HMGP funded project would support implementation of our local hazard mitigation plan and would significantly reduce critical water and wastewater infrastructure vulnerability to floods, fires, and earthquakes. As the first step in determining eligibility for HMGP funding, the Water Department submitted notices of interest for 9 projects in early 2018 to Cal OES, and Cal OES determined that 6 of these projects are eligible to proceed to the next step in the process, which is submitting a sub-application for each project through this competitive process. Of these 6 eligible projects, staff recommends pursuing funding for 3 of them, and staff have also modified one of the previously rejected notices of interest and have resubmitted it for consideration. So in this presentation, I will go over all 9 of these projects and explain the ones that we recommend for pursuing grant funding, the ones staff does not recommend, and why. So to start with, the 3 projects are the strongest candidates. This was based on a thorough analysis of looking at FEMA's scoring methodology and metrics. The first 2 will be familiar to you as they are already in the capital improvement plan and have been discussed at previous board meetings. These are the seismic retrofits to reservoirs and Laguna Treatment Plant flooding mitigation. The third will be new, and it is a backup generators at critical water and wastewater facilities project that was developed in response to lessons learned from the October fire. So to go over each of these, the city's existing reservoir seismic retrofit project is systematically bringing all of the city's reservoirs up to current seismic codes in groups of 3 reservoirs at a time. To date, 12 out of 21 have been retrofitted, and this project would be phase 5 of the project and would upgrade reservoirs R16 and R17 in Fountain Grove and R9A in Bennett Valley. These reservoirs are vulnerable to earthquakes, which could result in tank failure, especially given the proximity of the reservoirs to Rogers Creek Fault. If the risk if a reservoir fails is loss of water for firefighting and potable water supply. The project would correct seismic deficiencies to allow the water levels in the tanks to operate at full capacity, which would ensure there's sufficient water available for firefighting and drinking water. The second project is flooding mitigation at the Laguna Treatment Plant. As severe rainstorms in recent years have shown us, the close proximity of the LTP to the Laguna wetland leaves the plant very vulnerable to flooding. To be specific, the LTP, geysers and reclamation pump stations and biosolids facilities all have critical equipment located below the 100-year flood elevation. The project would address the vulnerability of plant equipment to a 100-year flood by constructing berms, walls, and gates around the facilities. These measures would collectively prevent the floodwaters from going inside the plant. And the third project is improving backup generators at critical facilities. The water department is vulnerable to all hazards that result in power failure at water and wastewater facilities, including pump stations and sewer lift stations. And the potential risks associated with such power failures include the potential for loss of water for public health and safety, overflows of raw sewage affecting public health and creating environmental hazards. The project would replace natural gas and propane generators with diesel generators and would replace or improve substandard transfer switches and portable generator connections. This would allow critical systems to operate even if natural gas and electricity are shut down during a hazard. This table shows the estimated costs for the 3 projects, including the breakdown between federal grants and city matching funds, and also the city's funding sources. HMGP funds are provided on a 75-25 cost share basis, which is 75% federal up to $5 million, and 25% local match funding. The LTP flood mitigation project shows a range of costs because alternate design options are still being considered. And though exact costs are still being refined, the total cost for all 3 projects is currently estimated between $23 and $29 million, of which roughly $13 million would come from HMGP funding, and the remainder would come from city matching funds. As I mentioned earlier, Cal OES did approve 3 of our notices of application for other projects that staff recommends not pursuing grant funding for. The first project is rehabilitation of Carly and Peter Springs emergency wells. The project would rehabilitate these 2 wells to protect 1.2 million gallons per day of existing emergency water supply. In the grant application, FEMA requires a rigorous cost-benefit analysis using their specific protocols. For a project to qualify for funding, it must show a benefit to cost ratio of at least 1. In May, staff sat down with representatives from Cal OES and calculated the benefit cost ratio using FEMA's method and was unable to show that the project benefits exceeded the cost using their methodology. Without meeting that requirement, the project is not eligible for funding, and staff recommends the department not move forward with drafting an application. The second project, the SCADA enhancement project, would enhance the reliability of the department's communication system at critical water and wastewater facilities and reduce vulnerability to all hazards that create communications failures. Staff recommends not pursuing funding at this time because the project design will not be at the requisite level of completion by the application deadline. FEMA and Cal OES favor projects that are in the design phase or are fully designed, and this project is still at the conceptual stage. However, the project remains a top priority, and staff recommends continuing to move forward with developing an RFP and project designs so that the city would be well positioned for future rounds of HMGP funding and or can proceed through the routine CIP prioritization process. The third project Fireproofing water and wastewater facilities would reduce vulnerability to fires at critical facilities by retrofitting structures with ignition-resistant materials and reducing on-site combustible materials. Like the SCADA project, staff recommends not pursuing funding because the project design will not be at the requisite level of completion by the application deadline. The project is also still at a conceptual stage. However, fireproofing remains a priority for staff. Staff are currently incorporating fire-resistant design into the rebuild of damaged facilities, such as rebuilding Skyfarm A underground. And staff will also incorporate fireproofing and fire-resistant design in future capital improvement projects at stations that are within or near high-severity fire zones. And last but not least, the Water Department submitted 3 NOIs which were not approved by Cal OES to move forward in the grant process. The first project on the list would convert the test wells at a place-to-play park into an emergency groundwater well. Cal OES rejected this project because the hazard mitigation grant program does not provide funding for the construction of new water supply sources. The second project would develop a hydraulic model to study if enhancing pumping capacity and or water storage in Fountain Grove would provide additional fire flow rates for catastrophic fires. Cal OES rejected this project because studies alone are not eligible for grant funding. And the third project would develop a storm drain master plan. The plan would evaluate the current condition of Santa Rosa's storm drain pipe and structures, and it would also include updated flood risk modeling for 10 and 100-year storm events. The project was originally rejected because it was a plan that was not linked to the local hazard mitigation plan. However, the city has revised the NOI and resubmitted it to show how this modeling and the larger storm drain master plan effort would tie directly into the city's current hazard mitigation plan by supporting decision makers in evaluating and prioritizing potential mitigation actions. The city expects a decision from Cal OES in the next week or so on whether or not the project is eligible to move forward with a sub-application. To briefly go over next steps, from now through August, staff are developing sub-applications for the 3 projects which I recommended, or which I discussed earlier, with the assistance of Ernst & Young. And staff will request approval from the board for the city matching funds portion of the project costs in early August once final costs have been determined. The sub-applications are due, as I said earlier, to Cal OES on or before September 4th, at which point Cal OES will determine which projects are eligible to move forward in the next step of the process, which is submittal to FEMA. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions of Ms. Myers from the board? Yes, Board Member Watts? Or your former name.
I still haven't done paperwork, so we're good. So for the matching fund portion, have any of those funds already been included in the budgeting process for this coming fiscal year, or would this be all new funding?
I don't know the answer to that question, Director Hornstein.
So I think I caught the question. The 2 of these projects of the 3 that were recommended to move forward are already in our existing CIP. So this is a great benefit to that. The 3rd project that's moving forward is an important one with the generators. We would do anyway with the lessons learned from the fire. So I think these are all, projects that are either approved or are compelling interests to meet our business needs.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Board Member Mullen?
Thank you. With respect to the 3 projects you're recommending we submit, is one of the conditions to receive this grant funding that the projects be shovel ready, and by that I mean the design and environmental review has been completed, or can we basically start from ground zero and include all of those costs in however we proceed?
That's a great question, and one that we've had many discussions with Cal OES in determining how far along a project has to be eligible for grant funding. As I mentioned earlier, a few of the projects hadn't reached any sort of a design phase, and Cal OES indicated that without enough design to be able to prove that the project would truly mitigate the hazard that we're saying that it would, and also to have a strong enough cost-benefit analysis and robust enough cost to be able to accurately calculate that, a project isn't eligible. However, a project does not have to be shovel-ready. It can be fairly early on in the design phase, and even, for example, the reservoir projects, we don't have designs for those 3 reservoirs yet, but because we have done 12 reservoirs already, and we're able to show that this is something that the city has done, we've done a feasibility evaluation, we'll have fragility curves, we'll have the necessary prerequisite studies to show why the project would work. That's adequate for Cal OES and for FEMA.
And my second question is related to, I think you said $330 million is available under this program?
Correct.
And who's the competition? In other words, we're in line along with, is it just municipal agencies? Are private property owners eligible?
Private property owners are also eligible, and municipal agencies, tribes. It's fairly open.
So there isn't a dedicated pool of money for instance, municipalities?
No, no.
While there's not, we do understand that going through an event like this that the city has gone through, you do kind of get a place near the front of the line. And that was reflected. We really got a very high number of our NOIs approved, and we think that was part of it. There's recognition of what we went through in an effort to help. But as we understand it, any municipality in the state can put in for this, but when you kind of get to the front of the line going through what we went through.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I will ask Board Member Badenford if she has any questions of Ms. Myers.
I do actually. Thank you very much, Dick. Has there, given that there are multiple submissions, has there been any conversation around prioritization or the likelihood of all 3 kind of buckets being funded? Is there any strategy on submitting all or one or in a specific way?
Well, there was, as I said earlier, we had the 6 that were originally accepted to move forward in the process, and through several conversations with Cal OES, in an effort to really want to make sure that we can harness our energy and put together the best applications that will be submitted, came to realize that the 3 of the projects would not likely receive grant funding, and as such recommend not having staff put that energy into development of those. And Director Hornstein, did you want to add something?
Well, just to add, based on the amount of funding, it's a good question. We don't think we're competing against ourselves and need to prioritize among those 3, because it is a pretty wide pool, and those projects are kind of disparate. They aren't all seismic projects. We have a flood project, a seismic, and kind of a core emergency response with the generators. So we think they're different enough, and if the cost benefit and the packaging of the project meets all their criteria, we think they're all very strong contenders to get funded.
Great, thank you.
Board Member Grable, did you have any questions? Okay, I don't either. Thank you very much for the presentation, and keep the board apprised as these projects move forward and their hopeful approval.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I look at this now as item 4.1 under study session, and I just suspect that Director Hornstein has a lot to talk about on this particular issue.
I will introduce it. I think this will be a informative presentation. It's a 2-part presentation on the upcoming preparation that we're doing for our permit renewal at the Laguna Treatment Plant. Heather Johnson and Sean McNeil, and you'll get a feel for the 2 pieces we go through it. And This is under a study session, so we do look forward to comments as they come up and answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. Excuse me. Good afternoon, Board Member Dowd and members of the board. As the director said, I'm Heather Johnson. I'm the Environmental Services Officer, and I'm co-presenting with Sean McNeil, Sustainability Coordinator. We're going to talk about the process so far of our NPDES permit renewal, and just get right to it. So this outline here, it outlines our approach that we've taken for the permit renewal process, in addition to kind of the approach for this presentation, so it's convenient. And we'll go through each section. Sean will address the blue ribbon panel, and then I will finalize the presentation, kind of talking about the last final steps to getting our final NPDES permit. You've received presentations about this, I believe, from Rita Miller and also from Sean. So some of this should be somewhat familiar. So the first part was our permit review, and I think it was the director who said, and it really resonated with me, that this was an opportunity for us that we are only given once every 5 years. And so really it's important that we take it seriously. And so what we did was we identified key staff that have different areas where they're affected by the permit within their jobs. And we asked that everyone give the permit a cursory review. And then we held a series of meetings where collectively we went through every section of the permit. And no item was too small, no idea was too outrageous. If there was anything that you thought that the permit needed changing or tweaking, or it would be better if it said it this way, we wrote it down and we compiled a pretty robust table of all of these components. And then we held a half-day workshop with those key staff members and our consultants, and we basically went through all of the items and we identified some of the very, very key items that were going to require us to do a little bit more work, they were going to take a little bit more effort, and these were 5 of those items, and I'll address the first 4 over the next few slides, and then Sean is going to pick up and talk about the nutrients. So for disinfection, in the city's current NPDES permit, there's really prescriptive language around our UV disinfection. And when we were reviewing the permit, we kind of thought, all right, maybe it would be better if this permit language was a little bit more general and it had, not such specifics. And so we had a meeting with the regional board and the Division of Drinking Water, and we came with this approach that was, the city wants to maintain compliance, but also have a little bit more operational flexibility within the plant. And as it turns out, the recycled water producers within the state of California are beholden to discharge requirements and also to Title 22 regulatory requirements for recycled water, and those Title 22 requirements are, they're the more stringent ones, and they're the ones that are putting the prescriptive language into our NPDES permits. So I think to change this language, it seems like it's gonna be a heavy lift. It's gonna be a big ask for us on this one. The next one is our recycled water program. So just to back up a little bit, in 2014, the governor of California, he issued an executive order declaring a state of emergency within the state due to severe drought conditions. I'm sure we all remember. And as part of that order, he directed the state board to adopt a statewide general order for recycled water. So the city is now going to be enrolling our recycled water program for distribution and use into this statewide general order. And what that means for our NPDES permit renewal is basically the only thing that's going to be staying in the permit with regards to recycled water is the treatment component. So all of the distribution and use, that includes geysers, will be taken out of our NPDES permit, and it's going to be under this statewide order. So that benefits us because Roanoke Park will also be enrolling at the same time. So now Roanoke Park is going to have their own, they're going to manage their own recycled water program. And then it also just kind of makes us consistent with all recycled water programs throughout the state. For toxicity testing, acute and chronic toxicity, just to give you kind of an idea of what it is, and I want to get this right. So it's the aggregate toxic effect to aquatic organisms from all potential pollutants contained in a facility's discharge. And so what they do is they test the test, it measures the water's effect on organisms and how they survive, grow, and reproduce. So we have acute and chronic toxicity testing requirements in our permit. And the city doesn't really discharge on a very frequent basis. So we have intermittent discharges, and we kind of asked ourselves the question, does chronic toxicity apply to entities like the city that have these intermittent discharges? And so there's a statewide toxicity protocol that's coming out, and basically in it, it has a provision in there that says that chronic toxicity will apply to dischargers who discharge more than 15 days consecutively. So the city of Santa Rosa, for example, discharged 5 times over this permit cycle, and only one of those times was it more than 15 days consecutively. So if we get this provision put into our NPDES permit, it would give us a good defined idea of how chronic toxicity would apply to us in our discharges. So the last one I'm going to talk about is our monitoring program. Our current NPDES permit has 7 separate tables for monitoring requirements, and that is for influent monitoring all the way to receiving water monitoring. And what we did as part of the permit review was we took a look at the results of those monitorings for the past, this permit cycle and maybe even before that. And we want to ask for a reduction in monitoring requirements for parameters that have been trace and consistent. So a couple examples of those are total suspended solids. Right now we have a requirement to sample our effluent daily for total suspended solids, and that's a 24-hour composite sample that we have to take. And of the 1,500 plus samples that were taken over this permit cycle so far, 75% of those have been non-detect, and we've had no solids violations due to TSS. So we're gonna ask for a reduction to 2 times weekly, which is in line with our influent TSS monitoring requirement. Mercury is also one because of some pollution prevention measures that we've taken through our pretreatment program with the amalgam separator, the dental amalgam separator requirement, and product substitution. We have been able to reduce mercury in our discharges down to parts per trillion. So we're currently required when discharging to monitor for mercury weekly, and we're going to ask for that to be reduced to monthly. So I'm gonna let Sean pick it up here. If you want me to scoochie.
All right. So I just wanted to give you a brief update on the Blue Ribbon panel where we are, give you a summary of our second meeting, kind of go over the different presentations that we provided the Blue Ribbon panel, and then talk about the next steps. So our project status, our first meeting was on April 27th, and the staff provided 2 presentations to the Blue Ribbon panel. We talked about the Laguna watershed, its natural history, and its impaired status as far as water quality issues. Then we also talked about the wastewater treatment and discharge requirements that the city was under, so that the Blue Ribbon panel members could understand what the conditions on the ground are for moving forward. And the second meeting was held on June 1st, and we had a diverse number of speakers at this one, and I'll go through each of their presentations since I've already presented to this board the first meeting. I'll just give you a brief update on the second meeting, and then our third meeting is coming up, and I'll speak a little bit more about that before we conclude. So I'm presenting the presentations that were provided at the Blue Ribbon panel in the same format that they were provided, so you'll see a little bit of format differences, but these are the presentations. The first one was provided by the Regional Water Board, and it was David Kuzmar presented on the Water Quality Credit Trading Program that'll be coming forward to the Regional Board for adoption on the 11th of July. We haven't quite seen yet the full complete program and read through it yet, but we'll be providing comments on that at that time. But they did give us a little bit of an insight into what the elements of this program will contain, and it's very similar to the nutrient offset program that we're currently under, with a few minor tweaks here and there around the edges. So our second presentation was, we brought in somebody from Larry Walker and Associates who took a look at statewide, what are we doing for managing nutrients in various other watersheds. And because he works in all these, Tom Grovehog works in all these different areas, he was able to give us a broader perspective and kind of showed that what we're doing in the North Coast Board with our permit is a little bit different than anywhere else. And so we wanted to make sure the Blue Ribbon panel got an appreciation that what's currently happening isn't the only way to move forward. So we talked about 3 different projects occurring throughout the state. First, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Nutrient Research Plan in the Central Valley, also the San Francisco Bay Nutrient Management Strategy, and then a statewide biostimulatory substances objective that's being put together by the State Water Board to really help provide guidance on permits like ours in the future. So just a brief, the Delta Nutrient Management Study, what was interesting is they got together a group of stakeholders and a technical advisory group, drafted a document, a charter document in 2015, and their overarching goal was to develop a framework that will lead to effective nutrient management decisions and actions that achieve reasonable protection of beneficial uses of the Delta, before they provided any kind of numeric limits on the dischargers in that area. So to contrast that with what we've done here, the numeric limits were put before the science was done. And the key framing question was whether the management of nutrient loads can actually remedy the problem. Make sure that we're putting resources towards activities that will help us in the long run. And so that's different than what we've done in the North Coast Board. The second program, using a very similar approach, was the San Francisco Bay Nutrient Management Strategy. A lot of dischargers got together, provided funding to support a long-term investment in science to set the stage for effective management decisions. There was system understanding to get the loads and processes right so that they would be defensible, so there was backed up by real scientific data. They developed a scientific monitoring program and have developed water quality objectives that are narrative instead of numeric, which is like trying to identify activities and things that dischargers should be doing, not necessarily here's your number like we have in our permit. And then finally, it's coming up with an implementation plan on how to move forward and how to spend future dollars, all in advance of setting numeric limits, which is in stark contrast to what's happened in our area. So they finished that presentation with, well, what if we looked at the Laguna de Santa Rosa and what kind of a program could we have there? A holistic watershed approach would be a key component to take a look at the entire watershed, have stakeholder collaboration, so it wouldn't just be the city negotiating with the regional board, and that the work and the activities would be based on science. They'd be looking at source loads, processes, monitoring, and research, all to develop modeling tools to help make the best decisions within the watershed and develop a management plan. After that presentation, we had Brown and Caldwell, who's been working with us on chemical addition for phosphorus removal through our normal processes, kind of run through a thought exercise. What could the city do to remove phosphorus through the treatment process? And just kind of break that down to their final slide from that presentation is this kind of somewhat complicated graph, so I'll explain. On the y-axis here, we have the average final effluent and total phosphorus in milligrams per liter. And you can see the graph is broken into 3 different areas. The first area is adding clarifiers with ferric chloride, and you could see just by doing that and increasing the dose, you could reduce it down from 3 milligrams per liter down to 1.5 milligrams per liter. Then if we added filters with alum, we could increase the dose almost to get to just below 0.5 milligrams per liter. And then if we did some very big system upgrades and change some of our processes, we could get down to a 90% reduction, right around 0.3 milligrams per liter. So we couldn't get to 0, but this wasn't a staff's preferred alternative, because this is would be a big change to our treatment plant to bring it down to these levels, and could be quite expensive. At the same time, as we talked last time, it would change the quality of our recycled water, removing that phosphorus, which would make it less beneficial to our agricultural users.
So let me just briefly jump in, Sean, if I could. These presentations seem to be, these 2 particularly, very significant to the panel. The first one, sharing these other programs and recognizing the regulatory approach to nutrients is shifting, given there's been far more failures and successes around the country, Florida, Great Lakes, Chesapeake Bay, in trying to regulate nutrients by just setting a limit and hoping for the best, versus really understanding the science. It's exceedingly complicated, and then developing a regulatory approach to really target the right actions. And it really got picked up and discussed. The chemical addition was, say, kind of a bit strategic on the city side, just to share with the board, and maybe particularly EPA and the Regional Water Board, that the city does have choices, and we aren't advocating that we just jump and dump chemicals in there to bring down the phosphorus. We like the projects that enhance the Laguna, but we're asking you to work with us and come up with ideally a bit of a different approach. But this is, to some extent, a backstop that over time is likely to become more attractive to the city, as under the current program, we're projecting the cost to continue to escalate.
So then we finished our presentations for the second day with just looking really quickly at the comparative costs of sewer. And one of the issues, or the big change in the comparisons of costs, really is the regulatory differences between agencies. And we were able to show that for other wastewater costs of a similar size, ours were much more expensive than others in the area, and that's there's a pretty direct link to the regulations that we're under, that the different types of monitoring and in this case, nutrient offset that we have to do, and that it's a big burden on our ratepayers. So we really wanted to make sure that the Blue Ribbon panel understood that the decisions that we're trying to make and push for really are looking at a cost-benefit analysis. With the Geysers project, taking most of our wastewater in the winter, recycled water, excuse me, and our urban recycled program and our agricultural recycled program all going full board, we really have a very low amount of discharge, and we feel that we're doing the best that we can, and that these regulations come at a big cost. And that was really appreciated by some of the business entities that are participating in the Blue Ribbon panel. So now, at the end of that meeting, we kind of got a little bit of a homework assignment from the facilitator, which was to identify options that you thought might be might be best, so the panel members to identify options that might be good moving forward, developing principles. And the city's working on a joint proposal with the Laguna Foundation and the Russian River Keeper to come up with a common sense solution, and really partnering with these panel members that might be at odds with our discharge compliance and come up with a common sense solution to help really move the regional board and EPA Region 9 to see that there might be an alternative to their current path in our upcoming permit. So our proposal elements are just at a high level. We would provide 2 compliance pathway options. We would allow or continue with the no net loading as a backstop. So this would be the first compliance as they're working on their water quality trading program. We would support that, but that the city would have a second option, and possibly other dischargers, to make a specified annual monetary contributions to address the water quality related laguna restoration activities that everybody wants in the Blue Ribbon Panel wants to see happen, that under the current framework most likely wouldn't rise to the top as being the most cost effective, and that the amount of the contribution, which was important to the panel members, could be revised based on our discharge, but we would only want that to happen every permit term. So setting a base amount that we would provide, and if we discharge less in a year, it may go down the following permit term, and if we discharge more of a permit term, it may go up based on that rise. And the benefits to this approach is that these funds could be spent on larger projects, and that we could go after projects that have multiple benefits in the watershed, and this is what almost everybody around the table wants to see happen. Unfortunately, under the framework as it is written, it's not in the city's best interest to move in that direction under the water quality trading program. But if we could do it this way, I think it would. Potential funding for the regional water monitoring program could also be included into this, and we could help get the science that's needed to drive the TMDL for the watershed. And then move forward on sustainable and certainty of our regulatory compliance. This is really important to the city, and staff really would like to make sure that as we're spending ratepayer funds on projects, that it's providing us all the regulatory cover that we need, and that it's not a gambling. Are we gonna need to get this many credits for next year's discharge when we don't know how much we're gonna discharge, or are those credits gonna expire? So this alternative compliance, it would be really important for our ratepayers. And also by setting that amount in the permit term, it would allow us stability in the sewer rates, and we wouldn't have this annual year-to-year fluctuations in costs just for our phosphorus discharge.
Thanks, Sean. All right, so the report of waste discharge is basically a fancy way of saying that we will be submitting our application for our NPDES permit renewal. It will consist of a cover letter, which I believe will be pretty robust and talk about all of our asks and our changes that we're looking for. It will contain a reasonable potential analysis. And so what the reasonable potential analysis is it's a way of evaluating a discharger's potential to exceed a water quality criteria in the receiving waters. So you look at all of the past permit terms, discharges, and you do a reasonable potential analysis on it. And we did not have any reasonable potential for any pollutants during our 5 discharges. There's a bunch of required forms, and then it is due to the board on August 3rd, 2018. So our steps to finalize this NPDES permit will be to return to the BPU on August 2nd with our final draft of the report of waste discharge. Then we will submit the report of waste discharge the next day. We're gonna request for an admin draft from the board once they've drafted up our NPDES permit. There's then a public comment period where the public has the ability to comment on the draft of the NPDES permit before a final is issued, and the city does retain the option to appeal that final permit once it's been issued. So, given all of that, and prior to the final blue ribbon panel and to the final report of waste discharge, we would like to hear any feedback from the BPU on this approach.
I will start to the far right. Board Member Grable, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I think you're on the right track, and thank you for reaching out specifically to other actors beyond the regional board. I know it takes sort of some long view regional foresight that sometimes if it's siloed within just two agencies, for instance, you don't get some of the big picture with organizations like Russian Riverkeeper that have partners across the country. They know precedents. I mean, Don McInhill is a great resource to have at the table, and I really appreciate that you guys have brought those partners together and I think come to a pretty good consensus, at least on the process of determining the course of action. Yeah, full support it.
Board Member Badenfort, do you have any questions or comments?
Just a quick one. My apologies if I missed it. Will there be any more public meetings, or will the group come back together as the final draft is being put together?
The Blue Ribbon Panel is really, we're kind of calling it a think tank or an advisory group without standing. So this was just developed by the city, as you know. We believe if they have clear recommendations, it's going to benefit the city in our negotiations with the water board. But generally, once we submit the application, then we'll enter a period of negotiation with the water board and of course be talking with the BPU. I don't know if it's closed session since it's a permit negotiation. I guess we'll find out.
It would depend on the context of the discussion. But.
Okay. So we'll be engaging the board as we get into the roll up our sleeves mode with the water board, and that will go on a number of months. The public has an opportunity to weigh in and comment when the board releases the draft permit in written comments and then verbal comments at the adoption hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member Mullen.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I appreciate all the work that you do on a continuous basis, working with the regional board, and these 5-year cycles probably seem to, in your world, to come pretty quickly. And every 5 years there's a new normal because some agency has preceded us and the standard now is whatever the last agency in the door is. So I appreciate that and the challenges it represents to you. That being said, when you were giving some of the highlights of what we're going to be looking at or they're going to be looking at, I was curious how the regional board is treating recycled water runoff under permits these days, both on the ag side and on the urban reuse side. It doesn't sound like it's part of the permit any longer, so it becomes just a system management issue. Is that how they treat it now?
I'm not 100% clear on the answer to that.
I can take a cut at it. One of the items that Heather mentioned was the recycled water program, and our intent is to enroll under the statewide general order and not have the requirements kind of duplicative in our permit in there. Within the statewide general order, there are specific requirements that govern runoff. Essentially, you can't have runoff, and it's somewhat prescriptive on that, and it deals with the rate of irrigation and a number of other considerations. So that is a regulatory requirement that is part of the permit.
Okay, thank you.
My comments about this is I want to compliment the two of you and the Blue Ribbon Committee and the rest of the staff who participated on it. My thoughts really are embedded in your chart 23. And my complaint about the way this has been handled in the past is that we didn't get the opportunity to do, did you get there?
Am I there?
23. It's the benefits.
Sorry. Am I off track?
Keep going down. You're going the wrong way.
Sorry.
Slide 23.
This might, I think our numbers are different.
At any rate, it's the benefits of alternative compliance approach. And I am quite hopeful that this moves forward and is finally accepted as a process by the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, because the way we've been doing it has not allowed us to do some of these things, which is get our hands around some of the bigger projects because of timing requirements to get there, the multi-benefit water projects, and et cetera, et cetera. This, to me, is what we really want as our goals, and hopefully we can continue to move that ball forward and accomplish them. That's success. Both the efficiency of this will help our customers, ratepayers, and also the environment. So it's really a big win if we can make this happen. So thank you for your efforts. Director Hornstein.
Thank you. I wanted to briefly note that I think we did benefit from having Board Member Davenport at the first meeting. It would be, we're offering, and we'd love to have a board member, if anyone's available and interested, attend the third meeting. I think that's going to be a rich discussion and really begin to see where the regional board and the EPA are on even considering alternatives in ours. So if there is interest, it's next Wednesday. Please let me know now or via email, and we'll try and loop in 1 or 2 board members.
I don't know what my calendar is at this point, but I will look it up and let you know I'd consider being a participant. Anyone else, possibly? Okay. And
yeah, I'll check as well, but I definitely support Board Member Battenford being there based on her expertise in the matter. So.
Okay, thank you.
So it's 10 to 2, and we'll provide lunch at the Utilities Field Office.
Right, we will need to know because we don't want more than.
Of course.
Okay.
All right, I think, does that conclude this particular presentation then? We'll move on. We have item 5 minutes approval and have none before us. We have consent items 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. Are there any concerns and anyone wanting to discuss these, or can we accept them all as one motion? Board Member Battenford? Hearing nothing?
No questions.
Okay. I will entertain then a motion for all 3 consent items.
I move that we approve the consent calendar 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3.
Second.
Motion made to approve the consent calendar 6.1, 6.2.63. Motion made by Board Member Watts and seconded by Board Member Grable. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That motion passes unanimously, so that brings us to a report item 7.1, appeal of water director decision to deny a variance request for 1800 Brush Creek Road.
Thank you very much, Board Member Dowd and members of the board. I'm actually going to invite Assistant City Attorney Suzanne Rawlings, who's been with us on a contract basis for a period of time, to come down and be the advisor to the board on this matter. And I'm going to go sit with staff as I've worked with them on this appeal. So.
As people are getting into their new positions, this is a rather complex item, and as you can see, this is something that I've never seen before, where we've had to have separate legal advisors in one issue, but I think it's prudent to do as suggested. So with that, I presume, Ms. Rawlings, you will kind of start getting the board lined up and in the right position to hear this matter.
So now I'm on. As I was saying, I think of you as Chairman Emeritus Dowd and members of the board. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Suzanne Rawlings. I was the board's attorney for more than 14 years before my retirement in 2015. It's a pleasure to sit with you today, and sitting through your meeting today was a good reminder to me of all the important work this board does. Today you're going to be hearing an appeal from the Water Director's decision to deny the applicant's request for a variance as to the required location of the new public sewer main for their project. As Chairman Dowd mentioned, that is somewhat unusual for this board. You'll be acting in a quasi-judicial fashion. You'll be making a decision as to your recommendation to the council, if any. When you act in a quasi-judicial fashion, you are required to disclose any ex parte contacts or information you've acquired about this matter. And because this is new to some of the board members, I just wanted to explain it a little bit, and that is anything you may know about this matter that is outside the record before you, which I think pretty much consists of the staff report, your PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if there's any other materials before you, but for example, I know that Mr. Cabrera, the applicant's representative, had kindly advised the city that he intended to try and contact board members to discuss this appeal with them. If you had a conversation with Mr. Cabrera or anybody else on this matter, this would be the time to disclose it. If you visited the site, this would be the time to disclose it. If you know any of the other the parties to this action or Mr. Cabrera, this would be the time to disclose it. As I mentioned, there's nothing wrong in any of those things. It's just a matter of disclosing it so that everyone's aware of it, and should anybody have objections to it, they can voice them now. So with that, I think Chairman Dowd may or may not have done ex parte disclosures once or twice, but I will turn it back to you.
I would like to mention on my behalf, first, I have known Mr. Cabrera, who is representing the property owner in this matter. I've known him most of that time as the Community Development Director here in the city of Santa Rosa. We also participate together on a nonprofit group called Rebuild Sonoma County Working Group, which is a group formed to be helpful to fire victims. The property owner, Rod and Lynn Wallace, were next door neighbors of my wife's and mine in the Cobblestone area, about 22 years ago. And the last piece of information, and then with Mr. Cabrera, I did have a cup of coffee with him about a month ago now, and he highlighted some of the issues that will be before the group today. And then lastly, on Tuesday of this week, I visited the property at 1800 Brush Creek Road. Just even though I've driven down that road many times, I've never really paid any attention to this particular piece of property. And so I took the time to look at it both from Brush Creek and the backside Rivera Drive just to become more familiar with it. I can emphatically say I have absolutely no financial conflict of interest in this matter with any of the parties that I have mentioned or any of the actions that I've been involved in. So I'll turn to the right, and Board Member Grable, if you have any ex parte communications you'd like to impart to the public, please do so.
Yeah, I would also like to disclose that I've had 2 conversations on telephone with Mr. Cabrera, and I've also received emails with some background information. I have also no financial interest in the matter.
Board Member Ross?
I received an email but was unable to respond as was out of the country, so I have not spoken with any of the members, any party members involved in this matter.
Okay. Board Member Mullen?
I also received an email from Mr. Cabrera inviting me to come and meet with him on the property site and go over the issues that he and his clients have regarding the action before us. I only responded to the email saying that I would prefer to wait until this comes before the body so I have an opportunity to hear the information from staff as well as from the applicant and their representatives and deal with it all at one time, and that's the extent of my contact.
Okay, I turn to Board Member Badenfort. Do you have any ex parte communications or activities to state?
Yes, I met with Mr. Cabrera for a cup of coffee just to review the documents before us where no other documents other than the ones that are also included in the packet did we discuss. And we both serve on a committee, a chamber advocacy committee, but in kind of our professional hats on. One is my role with my job, and but have no discussions there about CPU projects. Also, I'm not familiar with the property owners, and I did not visit the site.
Okay, that concludes that. I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Rawlings, and welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's really, truly a pleasure to be here. I actually will turn it over to Director Horenstein to introduce this matter, but it's actually an appeal of his decision, so there's not a whole lot he can say about it. Staff will be presenting.
Well, I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to introduce Karen Lozada. She's with the Water Engineering Services Department, and she will be presenting the staff's position information to the board, and I would be happy also to participate in any response to questions. And I believe that we will also provide time for the applicant's representative following staff's presentation.
Good afternoon, Good afternoon, Board Member Dowd and members of the board. I'm Karen Lozada. I'm the Development Review Coordinator for Water Engineering Services. I'm before you today to present a staff report regarding an appeal of the Water Director's decision to deny a variance request for 1800 Brush Creek Road. I will provide an overview of and background of the history, discuss the applicable codes and standards, and a summary of the appellant's arguments, along with our recommendation. 1800 Brush Creek Road is a 1.02 acre vacant parcel purchased in January of 2016 by the Wallaces, which is located on the eastern portion of town, surrounded mostly by existing single-family dwellings. Cabrera and Associates has requested that the city waive the requirement to extend a public sewer main in Brush Creek Road with future development of this property, and instead allow them to connect via a private sewer lateral over 200 feet through the backyards of 2 parcels to an existing sewer main in Rivera Drive. I provided 2 photos to show the property's location. This first one is an aerial photo, and the property is surrounded with a blue box. The arrow up in the right-hand corner is Rivera Drive, where they would like to connect to sewer. The second slide is a street view. It's showing the parcel from the southern borderline, looking north up Brush Creek Road. A little bit on the background. Over the course of the last year, the property owner and 3 separate consultants have contacted and met with staff at various times to discuss the availability of water and sewer to develop the parcel. Various projects have been proposed, anywhere from a single-family dwelling with a possible accessory dwelling unit to subdividing the parcel and building on 2 separate lots. To date, no applications for development have been submitted for review and conditioning. At each of these meetings, staff advised the property owner and each consultant that an 8-inch water main is available on Brush Creek Road, but that sewer is not immediately available at the property frontage, and a sewer main would have to be extended in Brush Creek Road to serve any future development of the property. In response to their inquiry to allow a connection via a private lateral to Rivera Drive, staff advised that alternatively, a sewer study could be conducted and submitted to demonstrate that all the surrounding properties that would benefit from the sewer main extension could not be served by the main, and that after staff review the study and concurred of the findings, that a variance may be granted to allow a connection as they requested to Rivera Drive. Typical findings would demonstrate that due to the elevation, slope, or other mitigating circumstances to each of the properties, that it would prevent a parcel from connecting to the proposed infrastructure. And to date, no study has been provided to staff. In February of this year, a variance application, which is included in your packet, was submitted by Cabrera and Associates, requesting that the requirement to extend a public main in Brush Creek Road be waived and instead allow the property to be served by a private sewer lateral through the backyards of 2 parcels to an existing sewer main in Rivera Drive. Again, no formal proposal for what is to be developed on the site has been submitted to date. In March, the Director of Water responded via letter, which is included in your packet, and denied the variance request as it was determined that granting the variance would negatively impact and place undue financial burden on the neighboring properties along Brush Creek Road and Normandy Drive. As a side note, Normandy Drive is actually a private driveway, and it serves parcels along Brush Creek Road that actually have a Brush Creek Road address. In April, Cabrera and Associates filed an appeal of the Water Director's decision to deny the variance request and request that the Director's decision be overturned. Our current city code requires that new development within 500 feet of a public sewer main connect to public sewer. It requires that construction of all sewer lines conform to our current design and construction standards, and that sewer mains to be constructed by private development be sized to accommodate the sewer from surrounding tributary properties. The current state plumbing code also requires that no plumbing system, building sewer, or private sewer disposal systems be located in a lot other than on the lot of the site the building structure is served. Our current design and construction standards were adopted in September of 2017. They provide guidelines to establish minimum acceptable design criteria. It gives the authority to the director and to staff to vary from the standards when situations are considered warranted, and authorizes them to grant variances or waivers to deviate. It specifies that the project applicant shall be responsible for providing any calculations or studies needed to support the proposal and for resolving any specific design problems, and that any final decision by staff or the director may be appealed according to city code, but first may be directed to the BPU for recommendation. As the City Council, with the recent adoption of the standards, granted the BPU the authority to approve all future updates of our standards, we opted to bring this report to you for recommendation prior to bringing the items to Council. Our design standards require that the sewer main be designed at least halfway across the property frontage, and that if full street frontage improvements are required with the project, that the sewer main be extended across the full frontage. The standards call out that the system be designed to incorporate any off-site sewer that is needed to connect to the existing main, and this is a common practice for agencies to require the extensions to take into account the surrounding properties and meet the future needs of the system to accommodate those parcels. The standards require that one lateral be provided to each lot. The lateral be located on the frontage for a parcel that abuts a street, and that laterals shall not be located in the easements when gravity service can be provided at the property frontage. The standards also call out that any private force main may not discharge directly into a manhole. In the appeal package the appeal from Mr. Cabrera is included in your package. I'm now going to walk you through the appellant's arguments listed in their appeal and provide staff's analysis of each item. As for the location, the appellant states that the property is located above and adjacent to large boulders and rock. Our findings show that no evidence was provided by the appellant to show that the roadway fronting 1800 Brush Creek Road is more rocky than any other location in Brush Creek Road or the parcel itself. Other projects along Brush Creek Road have been required to install infrastructure in Brush Creek Road and have successfully done so. In 2002, the property located to the north at 1900 Brush Creek Road was required to extend a public sewer beyond their property, install a manhole in Brush Creek Road that would serve the future needs of parcels along Brush Creek Road. An 8-inch public water main and a public storm drain exist along the frontage of 1800 Brush Creek Road, which indicates that it is feasible to extend sewer to this location. And while staff can appreciate that the area may have a higher concentration of rocky soil, based upon previous infrastructure projects on the roadway, there's no basis that suggests that such work would be prohibitive as suggested by the appellant, nor did they provide any evidence that would suggest that this portion of Brush Creek Road would prove to be any more difficult than any other sections where sewer mains already exist in the roadway, nor on the property itself. Staff has found for this argument that not enough evidence was provided to convince us that rock and boulder would be any more difficult for this project as it would be for any other along Brush Creek Road. For the existing improvements, the appellant states that the existing city sewer does not exist in Brush Creek Road along the property frontage. And although public sewer is not immediately available at the property frontage, it is available 110 feet north of the northern property line and 200 feet to the southern property line. The existing sewer that they're requesting to connect to in Rivera Drive is approximately 205 feet south of the existing southern property line. Staff has found for this argument that not enough evidence was provided to support why the extension of a sewer main would not be necessary to serve this parcel and the neighboring parcels along this proposed extension. Practicable difficulties. The appellant states that the construction at depths necessary in Brush Creek Road and the boulders and rock are inherently dangerous to workers, the public, and to the city maintenance staff. And as mentioned earlier, the area is known to have rocky soils. The city has existing infrastructure along the frontage of this property that city staff already routinely maintains, along with the existing public sewer north and south of this parcel. As mentioned earlier, no evidence was provided by the appellant to indicate that extending a public sewer main along the frontage where existing public infrastructure exists would prove to be any more difficult than in any other sections of Brush Creek Road or the property itself. Traffic control during construction of a project is not uncommon. Temporary lane closures are common during working hours and routinely addressed by the encroachment officer for the project. When public infrastructure is being maintained by our city staff, traffic control is performed by city staff to direct traffic during the maintenance work. Neither of these traffic situations pose undue hardship or heightened danger, and once again, the appellant fails to provide any evidence to support their claims. Staff has found for this argument that not enough evidence was provided to support the construction of a sewer main would be any more dangerous to the public or staff than already exists with our existing infrastructure in place at this time. For unnecessary hardship, the appellant states that the cost to trench at depths through rock and boulder could not be determined and only estimated. An email was provided from a local contractor assuming that the cost would be over $500,000. The appellant provided an email assuming that a public main extension would be over $500,000, which is not supported by any documented estimate. They did provide, however, an estimate from the same contractor, both of which are included in the variance request application in your package, dated June 7th of 2017, to extend a 2-inch private force main 260 feet across the same type of rocky soil that exists in Brush Creek Road with 2 sewer pump stations for a cost of $85,176. This estimate specifically called out that it excluded costly items such as engineering, permits, staking and surveying, electrical supply to the pumps, tree work associated with the project, hard rock excavation and off-hauling of any trench spoils, any landscaping or fencing repair or replacement is necessary, removal, repair, or relocation of any existing utilities, stormwater work, lot grading, or any laterals to the site, excuse me, from the force main, since it was not clear what was to be constructed at the time of the estimate. Excuse me. City staff has prepared an engineer's estimate to extend an 8-inch public sewer main in Brush Creek Road, 275 feet from the northerly manhole, known as manhole 77. This is approximately halfway across the property frontage. This estimate included a sewer lateral to the site and took into account the difficult excavation conditions, which is estimated to add an additional $55,000 to $82,000 to the cost, which is included in the estimate. Our estimate is $207,000 and it is included in your package. It's typical for a city project to cost more than a private development, as our projects include prevailing wages and we have to go through a bidding process where a private developer can negotiate with a contractor on their price. And while it's hard to compare these two estimates, as the city estimate is for work to extend a public main in the roadway, and the appellant's estimate for private force main is on private property, I'd like to point out that our estimate, although it didn't quote the cost for the permits, fully encompasses the work that would be done, including the lateral, the road work, and the extension of the main. Where the estimate they provided for the force main includes many items that would add quite a bit of cost to the project. For example, the cost to install the private lateral from that private force main being proposed to the future home, since it was unknown by the contractor what was being proposed to be built. It also doesn't provide the property owner with the long-term cost of operating 2 pump stations and maintaining the private force main in the future, which would include work to neighboring parcels if failures or overflows occur on the lateral. By having a lateral that's at your property frontage, access to the lateral for maintenance proves to be a better suited location if problems arise in the future. Maintenance of a sewer lateral is the responsibility of a property owner. Per city code and our guide to water and wastewater policy, developers can enter into what's called a reimbursement agreement with the city when public water and sewer infrastructure is extended. Under such agreements, the proportionate cost of the project is spread amongst the properties that would benefit from the extension. A public hearing is held to notify the affected parcels, and the city would then collect each parcel's share of the cost at the time they connect to the infrastructure and reimburse it to the developer for a term of 10 years. The agreement is renewable twice for a total of 30 years. These agreements are not uncommon, and they are routinely administered by our staff. It is staff's conclusion that not enough information was provided to support this argument. On this slide here, the parcels that are highlighted in brown are currently connected to our sewer system. The parcels in white currently are either on septic system or are vacant. The arrow is pointing to the subject parcel of 1800 Brush Creek Road. Manhole 77 is near the top of the slide, and our estimate extended that down to just about Normandy Drive. There are approximately 7 parcels on the western side of Brush Creek Road or Normandy Lane that would benefit from a sewer main extension with the project. If the applicant entered into a reimbursement agreement, future contributions would be refunded to the developer within the agreement period at the time of each of the parcels connect. If the decision, excuse me, if the decision was overturned and the applicant allowed to connect via a private lateral to Rivera Drive, their proportionate share of a future sewer main extension would be placed onto the neighboring parcels without the ability for those parcels to seek reimbursement from 1800 Brush Creek Road for what would be their proportionate share of the cost of the main extension. Extending public infrastructure is routinely required in new connection. Development mechanism for cities to complete gaps in existing public infrastructure for the benefit of the surrounding community. This allows development to pay for its fair share of public improvements that specifically benefit the new development. A fair and consistent process would avoid an undue future financial burden on the surrounding properties. A denial is appropriate in this case as the appellant has failed to submit even minimal evidence such as studies, engineered plans, or other information to support his claims. The appellant has failed to demonstrate otherwise, and the requirement to extend the public main should be upheld. It is recommended by the Water Department that the board, by resolution, recommend that the City Council deny the appeal filed by Cabrera and Associates on behalf of the property owners, Rod and Lynn Wallace, and uphold the Director of Water's decision denying a variance to waive the requirement of a public sewer main extension for new development proposed at 1800 Brush Creek Road. I appreciate the opportunity to present this information to you today, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
And if I might just chime in on a couple of additional comments. I think it's important to note that the city sewer standards provide that the applicant has the burden to demonstrate that a variance is appropriate in their particular case. So the burden is on the applicant. Also think it's important to note that there's a distinction between not liking the standard or requirement that's in the city standard, which were adopted last year by City Council with recommendation of the BPU, versus the justification for a variance in a particular case. Of course, if the board has concerns about a particular standard and that as a general requirement for citywide development, the action would be to reconsider the standard. I think it's important that the board consider carefully any justifications for a variance, because those will potentially be looked at by future applicants in whether or not they too should be required to adhere to a standard like this. So.
Does that conclude staff's initial report? Then I would ask the consultant for the applicant, Mr. Cabrera, if he would like to make a presentation. And just so we make the record clear, I'm not going to hold you to any time limit. So please make your presentation in complete form.
Is that working? There you go. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Tony Cabrera. I'm with Cabrera and Associates, and I'm representing Rod and Lynn Wallace on this project. It saddens and disappoints me to be here in front of you for this appeal. After all the efforts by City Council and staff to assist in rebuilding, we have a fire victim, a family being told the city can't or worse won't assist them in rebuilding their new home. Rod and Lynn Wallace lost their home in the Tubbs fire this past October. Their daughter also lost their home. So now, both families, 7 people, are living in one of the few remaining homes in Coffey Park. Rod and Lynn own the property, 1800 Brush Creek Road. They plan to build there and construct either a granny unit or an ADU. When they submitted their application to build their new home, staff, following policy, informed them that they would have to extend the sewer in Brush Creek Road. Looking into this requirement, into this policy, Rod and Lynn were astonished to find that the estimated cost to extend the sewer approximately 230 feet would be $400,000 to $500,000. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it would cost this much. I'm sure, as you're aware, as most people who are involved in underground utilities in this area, that the cost is due to all the rock and massive boulders lying underneath Brush Creek Road. That and the depth of the sewer. The sewer needs to be 9 to 11 feet deep. So with this cost staring at them, they regrouped and began looking for alternatives. They discovered a private sewer easement at the back of their property. They found that their southerly neighbor at the property right next door to them had been approved to connect in the sewer in Rivera through this very same easement. Rod and Lynn thought they had found a solution to their $500,000 problem. Surely the city would approve this connection. Their next door neighbor was approved, why not them? It made sense. They could build a new home and connect to the private easement. The city wouldn't even have to maintain it. There would be no new sewer main for the city to maintain. It would have no additional maintenance cost. Rod and Lynn were shocked to hear that no, the city would not approve such a connection. They would be required to extend the sewer main because that was the policy. They had just lost their home to the fire. Their daughter and family also lost their home. Now both families were living together in a small little house. They had plans to build but city policy wouldn't let them. It just didn't make sense. From all they had heard of how the city was doing everything it could to assist fire victims, how the city was looking for ways to rebuild, to get families back into their homes, it just didn't make sense. It was just another disappointment from the fire. If you look into your packet, you will see an exhibit under the appeal that I submitted titled Exhibit B. This is exhibit shows the Brush Creek Road area. I believe what I have in a black and white Xerox is a dark, but I believe it's a brown colored area on your exhibit. This shows all the properties that are currently connected to the city sewer system. As you can see on the east side of Brush Creek Road, that one little white square is the Wallace property. They are not connected to the city sewer system. They're requesting to do that. Going on and switching to Exhibit C. Again, you'll see 1800 Brush Creek Road. I believe it's highlighted in yellow. And right below that, their southerly neighbor, 1700 Brush Creek Road, is connected to the city sewer system. Yet it does not have city sewer along its frontage in Brush Creek Road. 1700 Brush Creek Road connects through a private sewer easement to Rivera Drive. This is the very same easement that the Wallaces would like to use. The Wallaces aren't asking for any special treatment or any special consideration. They're asking to be allowed to do what others in the area are doing. And by others, I mean there are other properties that are connected through private sewer easements. At the top of that exhibit, you'll see circled 1910 and 2000. These two properties have their sewer laterals through private easements. In discussing, I have some comments regarding the staff report. The staff report notes that the state plumbing code states, no plumbing system or parts thereof shall be located in a lot other than the lot served. This is not the case on Brush Creek Road. As I've just pointed out, 3 properties the city is aware of that has their sewer laterals through a private easement. The report goes on to note that manhole number 77 was installed by 1900 Brush Creek Road. That's correct, the manhole itself was installed. 1900 Brush Creek Road was not required to trench 230 feet in Brush Creek Road through rock and boulder and traffic. Their main line was down private property. Additionally, the cost of that main line was spread over a minimum of 7 other properties. The same can be said with manhole number 56, as stated in the staff report. It was installed to serve the Hunter subdivision to the east. Again, multiple properties got the cost spread through them, and there was no main line installed in Brush Creek Road. There are existing improvements in Brush Creek Road, water and storm drain, excuse me. The water line is 3 to 4 feet deep. We plan to connect to that. It is not 9 to 11 feet deep as the sewer needs to be. The city did its own estimate of the cost of the sewer. They estimate that it'll be $207,500. So let's say $207,000. For 230 feet, that's $900 a linear foot, almost $1,000 a linear foot to install a sewer. And finally, the staff report speaks of a reimbursement agreement that Rod and Lynn can enter into a reimbursement agreement such that any future connections would pay their connection fee and their fair share of the cost that Rod and Lynn has absorbed. The basic idea of the reimbursement agreement is just that one person, in this case Rod and Lynn Wallace, would front the money, $207,000, with the hope that someday in the future, somebody will connect to this line and pay their fair share. So the question comes, who's gonna connect to this line that is installed by Rod and Lynn Wallace? As I've shown you on the exhibits, the east side of Brush Creek Road is already connected, except Rod and Lynn. On the west side, you only have 2 properties that are able to subdivide and would be able to spread the cost out. These properties are predominantly in a county island, and they have worked with the county and are today in the county. Of the 7 properties that are possible to connect, only 2 of them will be able to subdivide. One recently, as recently as can be, went to the county and asked for an emergency permit to repair their septic tank. Actually, they repaired the lid of the septic tank. It was an old redwood lid, and it just rotted out. So the county issued the permit with the condition that this property connect to city sewer within 6 months. The county finalized that permit in November of 2003. That property is still not connected to the city sewer. The other property is one of the largest properties there. It's about 4.5 acres. With the zoning of RR20 getting half-acre lots, they're gonna get maybe 9 lots out of that. So that's a possibility for a future connection. But if you look at the Exhibit C, there is a manhole right in front of their property. If I was their engineer, I'd be fighting to connect to that manhole directly, just as the others did, right across the street to the Hunter subdivision. And I would run a main line onto the property. So in terms of any reimbursement in the future, I think the chances are slim and none. So finally, I'd just like to, my final comments I'd like to make is the estimated cost by the city is $207,000. That is for the sewer alone. That is not for the construction of the home that they want to build. They're gonna spend $207,000 just to install the sewer, and that doesn't even include the connection fee. Secondly, and I think most importantly, Rod and Lynn are not asking for any special treatment, not asking for any special consideration. They are asking to be allowed what others in the area have been able to do, and that's connect to a city sewer through a private easement. At this time, I'd like to call Doug Hamilton of Oak Grove Construction to come down and speak to the cost of construction in Brush Creek and the actual activity of construction in Brush Creek Road.
Thank you. My name is Doug Hamilton with Oak Grove Construction, and for clarification, I was an employee of Richard Dowd's for many years, and a personal friend of Lynn and Rod Wallace. I've worked with Tony Cabrera for decades when he was with the City of Santa Rosa, and my representation as a past president of the Engineering Contractors Association. I have a degree in construction engineering. I spent the last 40 years building improvements in Sonoma County and the neighboring counties. I am an expert on Brush Creek Road. I've built projects and worked on utilities. I want to comment specifically about staff's recommendation on pricing, and as Mr. Cabrera had commented, trenching a water main down Brush Creek Road is entirely different by a magnitude of 20 from doing a 9 or 10 or 11 foot deep sewer. Also about traffic control, the city standard requires a super trench. In order to build this safely, which has been a component of concern, you will be shutting down Brush Creek Road for the entire duration. In our estimate that we put together, we made an allowance for 5 days of rock excavation. That's being optimistic. Nobody knows what's out there. I say no one knows what's out there, but the city and many developers have worked all around that area, and every single contractor I know that's an engineering contractor just cringes when they drive down the road because all they hear is the metal scraping against those rocks. So I found it interesting when the engineering estimate from the city was $205,000. I'm wondering if the city is really willing to enter into a contract for $205,000 to install the improvements that's being requested of Lynn and Rod Wallace. Another comment about the lateral, that existing easement is already there. I was the one that spotted it. I walked around, I said, this is crazy, why would we extend a lateral? And I understand what the policy has been, and I actually think it's an appropriate policy. But I ran around in pop manhole covers and I found that that existing easement is there and there's a stub out. So when the Wallaces purchased this property, they had no concept that they'd be looking at a $500,000 expense, completely separate from the house, to install a lateral where there is already an easement with the appearance, at least, of an intent to service from that location. I'd like to answer any questions you have with respect to the estimate or actual construction. There's one other point I want to make is our proposal for the service of the force mains, and those exclusions are entirely normal, common, and traditional in the private work market. The staff budget just goes to the sewer clean out. It doesn't do anything on the property, and we were trying to have apples to apples. We can certainly do all that work, and we're in the regular business of doing so, but to make sure we were looking at not the house or ADU, it was how do we get sewer service to this parcel? Be pleased to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Chairman Dowd, if that concludes the applicant's presentation, thank you. This might be the time to take public comment before going to board questions and board deliberation.
Okay. Is there any public or staff comment? Okay. For the record, your name and address then.
My name is Norman Amadon. I own a piece of property at 1741 Brush Creek Road, as well as 2 vacant lots nearby there at the end of Normandy Drive, which is a private, has an easement. It's not a private road. I just want to speak to a couple of comments that Tony had. One, that property has changed hands several times over the last few years. I've been at this location for 25 years, and it's been a challenge to sewer that piece of property. And I do support staff's recommendation with regard to a public main in the future. It would facilitate sewering a property that I own. With regard to the cost, I do think the amount that the city staff has put together is reasonable. I'm a civil engineer. I have extensive experience with underground construction and bidding and that sort of work. I work for the city of Santa Rosa in the asset management department. With regard to the rock, I also have seen a great number of projects along Brush Creek Road and also on adjacent properties, and I really haven't seen rock over 3 feet in diameter. It's large, sort of cobbly rock, but boulders wouldn't describe anything I've seen excavated from Brush Creek Road in the last 25 years. So I don't think the boulder comment is accurate, represents. Of course, it's underground, we don't know. But I do think the 207,000 figure is actually on the high side compared to how the city estimates projects, but I'd say it's conservative. I think that is all I have to say at this time.
Sorry, Board Member Grable.
Just, I guess my only question to you would be, you know, in all fairness, if you had the same opportunity for a private easement connection that 1800 did, would you also be appealing, do you think?
I don't think that's a question that I wish to answer. I believe in doing what makes sense long-term, not just for one property, but for future development. So the cost of building structures in Sonoma County is expensive, and facilitating future development and not having sewer mains running through private easements is, you know, it's not a good idea. So I haven't run all the numbers carefully. I just became aware of this report earlier this week, so I don't have the institutional knowledge that other staff members have, so just leave it at that.
Any further questions of Mr. Ramadan? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I would ask any other board members, do you have any questions of either Mr. Cabrera or staff at this time?
I would just say that staff could respond to some of the issues raised if the board would allow.
That's fine.
In terms of a building application, our records don't indicate that they have applied for a building permit application at this location yet for it to comment on. We've only met with them at the counter or in meetings, so we have not seen a formal application for building to this site. As for the property at 1700 Brush Creek Road, they connected back in 1988. Don't know what was required at the time. Our file only indicates their demand fee payment, so we don't know why they were allowed to connect through an easement to that parcel. We only have the payment records as well as the properties that are further up north that he showed that were connected via a lateral to those sites. The easement that they say that they have through the 1700 Brush Creek Road, although they can obtain an easement through that parcel, it doesn't mean that the city will guarantee or allow them to use that easement to connect through it. Anybody can go to another neighbor and be granted an easement.
Well, I just want to say that because we don't have an application in front of us, we haven't evaluated those easement rights and whether they would actually grant that particular property the right to use the easement. So we haven't looked at that specifically, so that issue would have to be looked at more carefully when there's an application, and if there were to be a variance granted, then that would need to be evaluated.
I think the other thing we just wanted to address is that we have had conversations with the county, and it is our understanding in relation to the comment about the reimbursement agreements that should any of the septic systems fail, those properties would be required to connect to city sewer. So there is opportunity for reimbursement agreement similar to what has been provided to some of the other sites that were cited by the applicant.
On this slide, I failed to mention that on the properties are on the western side of Brush Creek Road across from this parcel. If any one of these parcels needed to connect to city sewer, the same requirement would be made of them to extend a public sewer main in Brush Creek Road.
I think that concludes our responses, but again, we're here to answer questions if there are any further questions from the board. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like you to remain there in case there are questions. I will first ask Board Member Badenfort if you have any questions from afar.
I do, and I might have more after a moment. Quickly on process for BPU, does this, regardless of what happens today at BPU, still go before council, or does this only proceed to city council upon a recommendation by us?
Board Member Badenfort, this is Suzanne Rawlings, who's sitting with the board today. Basically, either staff or the applicants could choose to take this matter forward to the city council, and then it would go forward with the BPU's recommendation. It could be that neither party will decide to take it forward, but either party could.
Thank you.
Well,
and
can I just, I'm sorry, I don't want to disagree with Assistant City Attorney Suzanne Rawlings, but actually the way the standards state in this process, they do say that it has to go to the city council or can pursuant to city code. So the way that the resolution is prepared, it's prepared as a recommendation from the board. Now, if the board decides that they would not support the director's position for some reason that the director and staff maybe didn't fully consider, the director would have, I believe, the discretion to determine that he would want to reconsider that decision. However, it is a recommendation to council, and therefore it's anticipated that the item will go to council.
And I do think we're saying the same thing. Either party could choose to drop it at any time. The standards have changed since I was your attorney to make the city council the final arbiter of the decision, but either party could decide to drop it, as either party can decide to go forward.
That's true. I just wanted to elaborate the resolution's recommendation.
Are there other comments at this point? This is a difficult situation for the property owners, but I, having served for many, many years on this board, I have to personally support the recommendation of staff. We have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, over maybe millions, getting private easements as we can out of our system so that the utilities that we oversee are in public right-of-ways where they are much more likely to see the need for repairs and repair them in timely fashions to keep our system operating. As a consequence, I support the recommendation of staff to deny the appeal. I think that the arguments put forth by the applicant and their consultant would ask us to make mistakes about private easements, repeating what has been done in the past. And I think we need to continue to look forward to improve our system. So that's my analysis of this particular situation. Difficult as it is, I understand it, having been in this business for a long time, and the costs are certainly burdensome, but I think you've also presented the right for them to reach an agreement with the city as other people might connect into it, and the city and this board would support additional connections to the mains that might be built in Brush Creek Road. So that's where I'm coming from. Any other thoughts or comments? Board Member Mullen?
Thank you. I too sympathize with the property owners in trying to rebuild after this, the wildfires and all the losses and then unanticipated costs coming up. I can appreciate the shock and with your rebuilding and so forth. However, I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask to help me understand this. Is with respect to the reimbursement agreement, I thought you said there's the ability for, it's a 10-year agreement with the ability to extend it twice.
Correct, for a total of 30 years.
And it would basically be what we've talked about costs here in different types of costs. Whatever the bottom line cost when it's constructed is going to be the cost. And then it would be divided, I presume, on a per foot basis?
It could be done in different ways. Some developers choose to go with the potential build out of each parcel and share the cost that way. Some do it on a front footage number, so it depends on how they choose to divvy it up.
Okay. So with respect to the term, if there's an opportunity with extensions to 30 years, is there an opportunity either for this board or for the city council to extend it beyond the 30-year term?
That's not provided for in the code, so I don't know that that would be allowed.
Okay. And then the other question I have, there was a lot of discussion about the existing properties that are connected to the private sewer. Those are existing structures, correct? They're not vacant lots, they're structures there.
Correct, they're structures.
And am I correct to assume that they were structures before the new standards were adopted?
Yes.
Do we also know if the development of this property would require any additional frontage improvements? I realize we're dealing with one part of that, but are we aware of any other frontage improvements that would be required to develop this property?
The other improvements would be subject to planning and economic development to condition that, but there are no sidewalks along this portion, so I do not know if they would require them to extend sidewalk.
Yeah, I don't believe that there are, I believe Brush Creek is actually an exception to frontage improvements for sidewalk, and it, given staff's information, there's water and storm drain available already. But there could be other things that we haven't looked at because, again, we're not evaluating a specific project.
Sure, so there could be additional requirements such as dedication of future easements for public improvements, et cetera?
We don't know, it's possible.
That's all my questions.
Board Member Grable.
Yeah, I a number of comments and questions, mostly comments. This is not an easy issue, and I do think this property is unique in many regards. Mr. Cabrera, I would discourage you from disparaging city staff's intent on this. I do want to point out that city staff has gone over and above to make sure that we go to great lengths to help fire survivors. That has been just something that our staff has really tried to bring to the forefront of every day's work. And I've seen that again and again and again, whether it's in Fountain Grove or in other areas. So the intent of the city to help fire survivors, I don't think is in question here in my mind. That being said, I think that this property is unique. There are a number of criteria that I think you can't apply to the west side of Brush Creek Road. The 1,700 parcel easement and the sort of island nature of this property amid all of those other connections, to me, indicate that any other property owner in this situation would try to, especially if they were under duress and have experienced trauma and are looking to find a place to build permanent housing for themselves and their families, I think that they would pursue any and all avenues, and specifically in this instance, that private easement to, what's the name of the street, the court there. I know that I would do the same. I would try to do that as well, knowing the costs and the length of time it would take to recoup those costs in any reimbursement agreement. I think on the west side of Brush Creek Road, there are a number of factors in play, including existing structures, the history of the septics on the structures, not to mention the gaps and manholes on Manzanita Avenue, and the other properties on the other side of Manzanita Avenue that do not have a sewer hookup right now. I think that there are other opportunities for the properties on the other side of Brush Creek Road that, as far as I can tell, that, I think it is a disproportionate burden for the property at 1,800 to shoulder that cost. I don't care if it's over 30 years or 10. That does seem to me to be a disproportionate burden, especially given the circumstances. And with absolute respect for staff's time and research on this and the precedent, I do think this is a really unique property with a lot of unique criteria, and residents who have definitely experienced, a lot of trauma and are looking for a place to start a new life. All of those things informing my decision. I think I'm gonna have to disagree on the strategy moving forward with staff on this, respecting absolutely the precedent, their research, the legalities. I do think that 1,800 property is very, very unique, and I think all of the different circumstances are just unprecedented and from what I understand, so.
Board Member Watts.
I have a couple questions. One is, and I'm sure you explained it in your presentation, but this was a lot of information, so I apologize if you're going to be repeating yourself, but can you explain the undue financial burden on neighboring properties a little bit more simpler for?
If 1800 Brush Creek was allowed to go out through Rivera Drive, and as we talked about, especially with the reimbursement agreement, that if you had to divvy up the cost of all those parcels, it would have to extend from manhole 77 across that frontage. Their share of that cost that they would have had to pay if they all went in together would be put on to the other property owners.
So that's assuming that there's another property along that line that's going to want to connect or build at some point.
Correct. Or be conditioned to connect.
And then my next question was regarding one of the properties that Mr. Cabrera mentioned that the county insisted they connect in 2003 or 6 months prior to that, and they have not connected at this point. I know that you are city staff and you are not county staff, but does anybody know why that property has not been or been required to connect after the 6 months? Or
I'm not even aware of what property that would be.
Okay. If you are able to respond. Great.
That property, I don't have the address in front of me, but it is, I think it was 1755. That property's in the county, and it got approved by the county to replace and repair the lid of its septic tank. And there was a condition, it's in the notes on the county records, that it was conditional that they connect within 6 months to the city sewer. The county finalized that in November of 2003. It was upon the property owner to come and knock on the door of the city and say, I want to connect. And I would assume that they're really discouraged from connecting to the city sewer because of the cost that they're going to bear by themselves to bring that sewer down the street. And in terms of the reimbursement agreement, I think it's on the basis or on the basic idea of the reimbursement agreement to spread the cost over all these properties. I think is a good idea. The catch on there, the question is, these people or these properties have been in the county for many, many years. They have not come in to ask to connect. I don't think they're going to. They haven't in the past. They've gotten their septic tanks repaired. They're not coming in. I just don't see that happening. I just don't see that happening. And just as Board Member Grable asked one of the public if he had an opportunity to connect through a private easement or to shoulder the cost, the gentleman had a very hard time answering that. And I think, to me, that it does come down to the cost of this. It is a very burdensome cost. I believe that so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
I think that, I'm a little bit conflicted around this, and this is a very difficult decision. I've been on this board for almost 3 years now, and we have had conversations around trying to eliminate private easements for the all the benefits that Board Member Dowd explained, but I do have some concern about this really being called a financial burden to other neighboring properties if the likelihood of them connecting is slim or being forced to or required to connect based on the county's 15-year and there's been no connection. So I'm conflicted on this and interested in hearing more questions and board member comments.
Okay. Board Member Mullen, do you have any more?
Since other board members are sort of weighing in on this, I suppose I should as well. I am a big supporter of standards and requirements, particularly on new construction, because that's the one opportunity the city has to require that the new standards, and I realize it's a moving target depending on when you come in the door, whether it's building codes or whether it's utility standards, they do change over time, and I realize that it doesn't get cheaper. The cost of doing business in those areas only climbs each time that we update or make them stronger. At the start of this meeting, we just witnessed the celebration of the award that the city was bestowed upon for its collection system. And one of the reasons I believe that they were able to do that is the standards that are applied when new construction comes and connects to the system. It's done in an orderly way based on a series of standards and conditions that will only add to the operation and also make it easier for our staff. And it should also be reflected in the rates that we charge our customers to participate and contribute into that system. So with that background and with that belief that I have, I also support the recommendation from the staff to deny the application based on their response, which was very thorough. I appreciate the time you've spent with this. And because I had a number of questions reading the staff materials, but your presentation was excellent in answering those questions, because I had a whole bunch of them that I was writing as this was going down, and I crossed off about 80% of them because you answered them all in your presentation. So I very much appreciate that, and I'm prepared to act on the recommended action to deny the request. Thank you.
I would ask Board Member Badenford if she has any comments.
Yes, thank you, Dick. Echoing Board Member Rabel, it's a perfect storm of circumstances, understanding the overall interest in reducing private easements. I too would attempt to do whatever I could, especially if there were neighboring properties, especially that had the same benefit that I was seeking, even though my timing was slightly different. There's a lot of factors that I've kind of grappled with over this meeting and the week coming up to it, that there's so many levers. There's what is the real potential for other neighbors to want to connect, whether the county properties or other neighbors, and would they want to connect to the same place is a question for me. That we don't know and haven't done any outreach to the potentially impacted property owners, so we don't know if that would be something that would not be a problem for those two parcels that this would cross. And I think what keeps coming up for me is that, you know, in almost every public policy and decision-making structure that we have a variance option for a reason. We have a waiver process for a reason, and it's all usually in a special circumstance such as this. It's not lost on me that it's a gamble. It's an enormous gamble for someone to say, okay, I will go ahead and absorb the financial burden and hope that in the next 10 or 30 years, somebody may come and help offset the tremendous cost. Being not an engineer, the difference between the $500,000 estimate and the $200 and something thousand estimate on what does it look like underground, which we can't foresee until we get down there. I only know anecdotally, not being a developer, a contractor, or an engineer, that it seems likely that we really don't know until we get in there. And at that point, that is, it's too far down the road. So I'm torn, but think that I'm inclined to oppose the decision. But if there's any other comments or discussion, I appreciate a discussion amongst the board.
Board Member Watts. Let me finish with this, and then I will allow that.
Have the other surrounding properties that are not connected to city water and sewer, have they been contacted by the applicants in regards to a potential agreement? Thank you.
Mr. Hamadan.
Thank you. So we're talking about alternatives here. It's not having reviewed all the as-built and studied it. I'm wondering about the depth of the sewer line. It seems to me, and Tony would be able to answer this, is it possible to put a shallower sewer main in Brush Creek and then have 1,800 use grinder pumps to pump up to a shallower sewer? Why the 9 to 11 foot depth if they could put something in at 4 or 5 feet and use a grinder pump to provide sewerage for that lot?
The manhole 77 to the north is 9 feet deep. So we do know that the sewer at that point is 9 feet. In order for sewer to gravity, it would have to get deeper. It couldn't become shallower as it came south down the road.
Well, yes, Board Member Grable.
I have a question. Yeah, I've dug many a sewer main. Less than 9 feet is hard to come by. Done some of them by hand. Not fun. On Manzanita Avenue, there's a number of properties that are not hooked up to sewer. Have there been any similar issues on Manzanita Avenue? Any applications? Any sign of intent? There's a huge stretch on Manzanita Avenue between manholes and a high concentration of properties that are not hooked up to sewer. That to me is a much bigger issue than the 1,800 property, honestly. Is there any sign of intent or any paperwork in the process on any of those properties?
I'm not aware of anything currently. I wasn't looking at the properties on Manzanita. I have been here 28 years, and I know in that time, not only along Manzanita, but other properties on Alta Vista, which is also in this neighborhood, a few streets over. We do have portions there as well where we don't have sewer. Typically, they would have the same issue. It's cost prohibitive, and until their septic systems have failed, and then the county does require them to connect at that point, that it stays as is.
Right. There's just a much higher concentration of parcels in my mind. But yeah.
I think it's important for us to recognize what the status of the design is for this sewer, and I would say at best it's preliminary. And with a resolution before us, if the board so choose to favor that, there's still opportunities to look at the potential design, talk to neighbors about connecting. None of that is prohibited by the resolution that's recommended before us. So I think we're at that point where we can either recommend the resolution that stands before us or oppose it and let the applicant and staff continue to work with it. Obviously, if you read this resolution, which I want to read it in its complete form. If we do have a motion, I don't want to waive the reading of the text. I want to be very clear and read every word that's in there. There's if you look at it, it's that this goes on to the city council and for their final approval, and the applicant and their consultants can do further work in the interim before it gets there. I'm looking forward to a motion one way or the other to see if there's a majority.
Point on process, what would be the nature of the motion? Either way, I'm a little unclear on the language of what a motion would be to either support or oppose the recommendation of staff.
Well, there's a number of ways it could be done, but I think most likely you'd be looking at either, if you were in support of the staff recommendation, you would be moving this resolution and moving the resolution by its full title. If you were opposed to it, you would be moving a resolution to deny the appeal, in which case we probably will need to come back to you later with findings because we don't have a resolution that contains findings on denial of the appeal.
Okay, but the staff recommendation right now is to deny the appeal.
I think, do I have that correct?
You know what I'm saying? So that's
I'm
why
sorry.
I'm having trouble with language on that because.
I'm sorry, a resolution, let's see if I've got it straight. I'm a little rusty, as you know, but yeah, a resolution upholding the decision of the director and denying the variance request. That would be if you were in favor of the staff recommendation. Otherwise, you would be moving a resolution. Well, you don't have a resolution, so you would be making a motion to, grant the variance request, and we would have to come back to you later with findings for your with a resolution that contained the findings.
That's why, if someone is of a mind to make a motion, I want you to read this entire resolution as a part of your motion, just so everyone is clear as to what they would be voting for or against.
I'll move the motion to adopt the resolution and support the staff recommendation to deny the variance request to connect to the public sewer main at 1800 Brush Creek Road. Do I need to read the entire title?
The chair has indicated he'd like you to read the whole resolution, so yes, please.
The whole resolution?
Just read the
the title.
Read the whole thing.
Okay, let me start over. So I move adoption of the resolution of the Board of Public Utilities of the City of Santa Rosa, making findings and recommending that the City Council of the City of Santa Rosa deny the appeal filed by Cabrera and Associates on behalf of property owners Rod and Lynn Wallace of the final decision by the Director of Water denying a variance request to waive the requirement to extend a public sewer main to serve a new development for the proposed project at 1800 Brush Creek Road.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
I will second it.
Okay, a motion and second has been made and the resolution has been read. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
I didn't hear yours, Ms. Badenfort.
Oh, nay.
Nay? Okay, so that's 3-2 vote in favor of the resolution as provided by staff. Is that correct? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you all for the presentation, and we'll move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the board.
All right, that concludes that item. So we have public comments on non-agenda items. Any referrals? Written communication and possible board discussion. I don't think there are anything. Subcommittee reports. Board member reports. And lucky 13, director's report.
Board Member Dowd, I do have a few comments to share briefly. We're moving through all things FEMA and making good progress. I'm pleased to report in terms of getting all material for the public assistance in, working through, as you heard today, the hazard mitigation grant projects. And also I wanted to share that we had a couple of very positive meetings today. This week, where we were able to, with key decision makers present from FEMA and OES, informed by the regulators in one room, that supported the city's approach and responded to a number of confounding questions that continued coming from FEMA. So it was very significant. As an indication, for the first time, FEMA acknowledged the contamination issue is attributed to the fire, but it was far more than that. There was just a number of very difficult issues that we were in a circular process with FEMA and with their deputy director from Region 9 present, and similar from Cal OES and key regulators, one by one, moving through the issues. So I think on this large project, the eligibility of the water contamination project and all the costs that have gone into it, from the investigation and the repair work that's now underway, it's looking so much more favorable than it was just a few days ago. So a lot of great work. And I did want to note really great support from the city manager and some lobbyists he brought on to reach out to our congressional delegation that seemed to really aid in setting this meeting up with the right players and moving this issue forward. So that's really great news for all of us, but certainly staff that has spent so much time on these issues. Also wanted to share that there's a lot of work underway to facilitate the projects related to the replacement of the service lines that are now underway inside the advisor and outside. So a tremendous amount of staff work that goes into the shutdowns and coordinations and kind of facilitating that work with the contractors. Also wanted to share that staff has completed the installation of a temporary pump at our destroyed Hansford Court lift station that includes installation of SCADA and alarms, and will be able to operate this really upgraded temporary unit in a reliable manner while the reconstruction project is completed. So that was a big lift from staff and successfully done. And lastly, wanted to share that we've been keeping the board apprised of the SGMA and the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And recently the state is recommending that our Plains subbasin be reprioritized from medium priority to high priority. There's no near-term direct effect, but it will likely play out in the future with more attention and possibly more work in stringent timeframes. So there'll be more discussion as that proceeds. That concludes my remarks.
Okay, any questions or comments about that report? As I get ready then to close this meeting, I do want to say I really want to thank the City Attorney's Office, both you, Ms. McLean and Ms. Rawlings. A lot of work went into this. Also, I would like to have Deputy Director Burke tell the members of the staff that worked so hard on this, this denial that we had to go through. A lot went into it, and I appreciate the effort. So thank you very much. With that, this meeting is adjourned.
She's talking about the annexation of Roseland and how it will affect us. Will it make my property taxes go up? No. Shh. Are you sure? Yes. Shh. Cool, because most of my assets are currently tied up in real estate.